For people who lived through the late 90s and early 2000s, India's Most Wanted and its host Suhaib Ilyasi would ring a bell.
India's Most Wanted.
The show was a sensation in every sense of the word, and what set it apart was that Suhaib's team joined hands with the police to catch a host of criminals as the nation watched gleefully, hooked to their sofas. But for someone like me, India's Most Wanted wasn't something I grew up with. CID was. The iconic show is etched in pop culture even today for being a crime show as much as it was a comedy show. And I say this as a fan of the show, by the way, because it was truly my window to the world of crime and notoriety. But true crime was something that was restricted to television news or non-fiction shows for the most part. Think of Crime File. Cut to the big OTT boom in India, and you see true crime being among the hottest genres on streaming platforms. One look at Netflix and you'd know I'm right. I mean, look at the titles they've put out in recent times.
In a horrifying incident, dead bodies of 11 members of the same family.
दिल्ली के बुराड़ी इलाके से आ रही है।
आखिर 3 जनरेशन एक साथ सुसाइड कैसे कर सकते हैं? और 11 लोगों का मर्डर होना ये अपने आप में बहुत बड़ी बात है।
What's her name? Shanann Wong.
Hey guys, my name is Shanann. I just want you to know a little bit of my story.
I get this call from my boss. He said, I need you to see Jeffrey Dahmer.
We're only going to have one witness, and that is the daughter, Jennifer Pan.
The disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein is dead.
Did he kill himself? Was he killed?
इस मामले में मुख्य आरोपी जॉली नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी में एक लेक्चरर थी।
जॉली सिर्फ औरत ही नहीं, एक माँ भी थी। उन पर 14 सालों की अवधि में अपनी सास, अपने ससुर, पति और 3 और लोगों की हत्या करने का आरोप है।
The quality of the content, the research and production value, and the general vibe is so different from what it used to be like in the late 90s. And that's what we wanted to capture in today's special episode, where we delve deep into the business of true crime. What is the opportunity that this space provides? Who is at the forefront of capturing these opportunities? Why is true crime the flavor of every season? How are true crime podcasts changing the game in India? What is it like globally? What goes into producing a true crime series? Is the podcast model profitable, or is it OTT and streaming giants that bring in the big bucks? We discover all of this and more today as we speak to an Indian true crime podcaster duo, the director of a Netflix documentary, and an award-winning investigative journalist turned True Crime Collective co-founder. It's Friday, May 31st. I'm your host, Diya Rekhi, and you are listening to Murder, Mayhem, Money, Why True Crime Sells, only on the Morning Brief from the Economic Times. A few months ago, I saw a random recommendation pop up on YouTube. It was titled The Mysterious Honeymoon Murder, and I was instantly intrigued. I was soon sucked into the world of the Desi Crime podcast that takes a look at some of the well-known cases, as well as those that one wouldn't have even heard of from across South Asia. I watched one episode, then I watched the second, and the third, and then I just kept watching it like an addict. So when I was conceptualizing this episode, the Desi Crime podcast was naturally my first port of call. Here's presenting the Desi Crime podcast duo, Aryan and Aishwarya, to take you through how the show came into being.
It's a podcast we started 4 years ago from our tiny little dorm rooms in the US. And the idea was to fill in a gap in the Indian market of true crime stories told well, number one. And secondly, true crime podcasts, because that was a time in the US where podcasts were booming. And we realized, obviously, India had a huge market. Spotify had just come to India. And we really, really wanted to fill this gap of good storytelling, true crime stories done well, issues tackled with sensitivity. And true crime stories to us told the story of the fabric of India, whether it be honor killings or whether it be, ragging in Indian colleges, whether it be police brutality. All of those tell a story of South Asia and our culture and the things we can improve on. So that was the concept behind the podcast.
Yeah, and too long, I think India was accustomed to the case, sensationalized retelling of stories. And I think the newer audiences know what quality looks like, especially with OTT coming in and shows like Sacred Games that showed, oh my God, content can be covered in a manner at a production that otherwise wasn't in India, and we wanted to emulate that into the audio world. And yeah, that was the premise of Desi Crime.
But there are so many crime shows like Savdhan India, for instance, that was so popular. So what was the kind of market that you were looking to tap?
Crime is one of India's biggest genres in general, and it's been there since time immemorial. What had happened was it had stagnated in terms of format and forum evolution. So what happens in India with storytelling, or I think just innovation in general, is if there is a low-hanging fruit within a genre or within a content type, producer or a creator or an artist will make the MVP, the minimum viable product. And if the minimum viable product works, they will not evolve it. It will stay that way forever because the least amount of investment leads to decent number of views. Why innovate? And so you just commodify it and the MVP keeps selling and selling. So you'll see Savdhan India and the shows of its like Crime Patrol. They didn't innovate and evolve at all once they realized they had landed on a format that works. We realized that 2020, while crime as a genre was pretty widely done, we can adapt it to the burgeoning medium of podcasts and eventually video and short form content. And so in that sense, the landscape has changed. And what it is now in 2024 is, I think, the OTT's dream. I mean, that's what their investment is going into entirely because crime shows work, fiction or non-fiction. And you can just look at the Amazon Prime and Netflix budgets in their upcoming slates for true crime. It's preposterous.
Being a podcaster myself, working primarily in the audio space, I can say for sure that we can produce episodes on a shoestring budget. But my question is whether the investment really increases as you scale up.
I will just say in terms of the financial side of it is the jump from audio to video is where production goes really high. Like audio production requires a mic, 2 mics and a laptop. And you can record from anywhere in the world. Ishwarya and I have recorded podcasts hungover from an Italian grandmother's house while she was in her car in a snowstorm. And we've recorded one of our most popular episodes like that because it's on audio and nobody knows where we are and we can do it from wherever we want to.
Then why make the jump to video at all?
That's because the payoff is higher. But why is the payoff higher in video? That's because of 2 reasons. One, YouTube is the only platform that pays you directly upfront, unlike any other platform, whether that's Instagram or Spotify or these platforms, they don't pay you. The second thing is face value. We are one of India's top 5 audio podcasts, yet the face value we don't have proportionate to a YouTuber because again, India is a video first economy. Indians love, like even if you could hear it, you want to see people's mouths move. True. Like the Indian psyche that's ingrained in us. So that was also crucial.
Which brings me to the monetization aspect. Where do you make your money from then?
So we recently, our production company, it's been 3.5, 4 months. Before that, Desi Crime was licensed to an American media company for 1.5, 2 years. But now we are independent, right? Independent again, no licensing deals. We have to make money ourselves. Of course, one side is brand deals. For that, I recommend any successful creator to find the right agency and right agents and managers to, help them navigate this space because it's really murky and it's weird. And, brands need to be educated about the nature of your content. So brand deals are one revenue channel. The other channel that we've been pleasantly surprised by, I would say, is YouTube. Because revenue per thousand views, RPM, is very low in India. They are 100th the rates in America for the average Indian creator. We were worried YouTube is going to be that sort of a thing for us, except we have American RPMs and CPMs on our channel. Now, why is that? Because we are one of the few English-only creators out of India on YouTube. And what that does is our audience also then becomes tier 1 city or international, which adjusts our RPMs accordingly.
Before I let you two go, we've spoken about YouTube, but I want to ask you about Instagram. Where does that fit into your strategy?
I think Instagram has, from the very beginning, by us, we haven't used the podcast to drive traffic to Instagram and grow a following there. I don't know why we took the strategy we took, but from the very beginning, it's been the Instagram will funnel to the podcast and the Instagram will funnel to the YouTube. And so this is a trend that we've come to see on our own ideas like actually work out, where our reels that have gone really, really viral. It was Sridevi that went viral first at 4 million views. Sure. And now recently the reel on Sweet Bobby, the podcast Sweet Bobby, went viral at 30 million.
Your listeners, in one line, that case is a woman who dated a man for 10 years that did not exist. Anyway, Shara, you were saying.
And so it directly funneled into the YouTube channel. And so Instagram for us has been very, very important in growing the page. It's been a major driving force. Now it's a major source of like community engagement, where we have our broadcast channel, which has an astronomical number of people, more than 10,000 people on our broadcast channel. So now it's a very valuable tool for community engagement as well, which we absolutely love.
Sure, these podcasts are doing a terrific job. But when it comes to scale and reach, OTT platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime definitely have an edge. Netflix is among the global players who've really gone after this space. Be it Narcos or Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, the streaming platform has latched onto the genre, and how. Closer home, Netflix's docuseries like The Indian Predator trace the crimes of serial killers. Its other show, House of Secrets, The Burari Deaths, examined the controversial theories surrounding the deaths of 11 family members in New Delhi. Here's its director, Leena Yadav, in an interview with Humans of Cinema on how she got to doing it.
When this case happened, I actually said it at that time flippantly that, they're not reporting what really happened in this case. I wish I get to make a, investigative documentary on this.
Okay.
And then 1 year later, I got a call from Netflix saying that the international team was coming down, whether I wanted to meet them.
And then, of course, there's the Emmy Award-winning drama series Delhi Crime, based on the horrific Delhi gang rape in 2012. As per data from Netflix, shows like the Indrani Mukherjee story, The Hunt for Veerappan, as well as Indian Predator, The Butcher of Delhi, were all among the top 10 trending shows in India, and also made waves in countries like the UAE, Maldives, Qatar, and Sri Lanka. It has given people who read about American serial killers with new names to pour hours over, be it Charles Sobraj or Jolly Joseph. Speaking of Jolly Joseph, I spoke to the director of Netflix's Curry and Cyanide, Christo Tommy. The film investigates her case involving, among other things, the murder of 6 family members. So, Christo, can you begin with telling me how eager an OTT platform really is to take true crime content? And also if you can explain why.
I think for them, true crime has done really well in the US as well. So there are many popular shows in the US that has done well over a long period of time. I think in India, they started with Burari, one of their earlier shows did really well in terms of viewership. So I think there is always an interest around true crime for Netflix. And this is something that, over a long period of time have repeatedly worked for them. But at the same time, I don't think that they're, only pursuing this in non-fiction space. They're also pursuing other genres as well.
But Crystal, tell us about your trajectory with Curry and Cyanide. How were you approached and why did you pick this story to direct?
Yeah, so this initially started as a 3 episode series. When it came to me, they were looking for a director and they came to me. I took upon the project because I thought the story was exciting and you do not come across such a story every day. And once I came on board, and then like it was during the post production stage that we decided to shape it as a film because we thought that would do justice to the content more. And this was a time when I was doing my non-fiction project, but I thought this story was unique. That is what I think got everybody focused on working this for a long time. It took 2.5 years from me signing on to the release.
And how do these discussions typically happen, about things like budget or involvement and so on?
Netflix is actually very closely involved in terms of, the creatives right from the beginning. So once when I came on board and I was able to get the family members on board, we did versions of the script before the show. We worked on the look of the show and things like that. And even after the shoot, I think during the edit, they get involved a lot in terms of how can we make it most impactful. So Netflix, I think it is very much involved creatively right from the beginning.
Sure. And when did you first realize that Curry and Cyanide was a success?
It's after, I think, couple of days after the release when, people started responding from all walks of life, like especially in Kerala. I think friends were telling me that their parents are hooked onto this, their grandmothers and grandfathers are watching this. And then I was actually traveling abroad, soon after the release. And I was in Indonesia and Malaysia and all that. And even there, the show was in the top 10 there. And it was in the top 10 for, I think, around 30 countries. So even in the first week, I think after 4 days of release, it was on the global list at, I think, number 4 position. So then we knew, and in the second week, it just became much, much bigger.
Got it. But can you give us an idea of what the ROI from this is? And also if you could compare that with the kind of remuneration you got from this vis-a-vis how different it would be if you had directed a Malayalam film out of this whole thing, for instance.
We are all commissioned as on hire. So I'm working as a director on hire on this project. And also, it is a little bit different when you're working out of Kerala on a feature film here. So if you look at the numbers, of course, it is going to be higher than what you get paid for a similar thing in Kerala. So actually, when you work in Kerala, you get the IP, you get a part of the IP as a writer, as a director, you get a share of the IP. But your payment would be low because, it's a small industry and the audience also less in number. So the payment would be low. But when you're working with studios or platforms, the studios and the platforms own all of the IP, but then you get more pay than you would get in Kerala. So, that is the difference, I think.
How does the IP help?
So IP helps only if, that film is getting remade in some other languages, or there is a prequel, sequel, or intellectual property right can be exploited in any other way in the future. That is when IP comes into play. Otherwise, the film just releases and that's it, then I don't think IP much comes into play.
Not just Netflix, no one wants to be left behind in the true crime race, it seems. And while podcasters in India and across the world are picking up cases to shed light on, sometimes they manage to even get those case files reopened and revisited decades after the crimes.
After more than 20 years in prison, 42-year-old Adnan Syed is a free man tonight. Syed was serving a life sentence for the murder of his girlfriend. His case was the subject of the popular podcast Serial.
Who better than a journalist or just someone who's been covering a case closely to tell a true crime story, right? And that's what Project Brazen is about. For those wondering, Project Brazen is a journalism studio and production company specializing in podcasts, books, documentaries, television shows, and films. And we got Tom Wright, who's the co-author of Billion Dollar Whale and the creator and host of several incredible podcasts, a Pulitzer finalist and the recipient of several other prestigious awards. Tom takes us through all that goes into producing these high-quality pieces that are then lapped up by studios and streaming platforms alike. Listen in. I have to begin by asking you what the transition was like for you working as a journalist at the Wall Street Journal to being a podcaster.
So the transition was really moving from, doing news and where you have to think more about the nut graph, the news point of a piece, to much more now thinking about what's the narrative arc of the characters. Like, why are people going to want to listen to our shows? They can't be about small beans subjects. They have to be about big things. So, for example, the first podcast we did, Fat Leonard, was about a guy, a very fat guy, a 200-pound guy, who ended up totally corrupting the US military. He was a contractor for the US military who supplied food and fuel to the US Navy. And it's just a crazy story. The guy, what he does is he creates parties for admirals. So basically, women drink Cristal champagne, and then in return, the admirals allow him to overcharge for all the services, and he becomes like super wealthy. But he also records some of the sexual encounters that the admirals have with prostitutes. And so he has all this blackmail on the US Navy, and then he's caught, and then we smuggled him a microphone in jail, and so we're developing that also into a film. So, those are the kinds of shows that maybe it wouldn't have been that easy to do as a journalist at the Wall Street Journal, but you can do them at much greater length now when you're writing them as either as a magazine article or as a podcast with an eye to it being a TV show or a film. That's really the goal of what we're doing.
I've listened to some of your podcasts and they're absolutely incredible. But what struck me the most was the granular detail in every one of them. How long does a project typically take, and how do you generally go about it?
Well, we have a team at Project Brazen. We have an office in London, one in Singapore. We have people who do audio editing. We have producers. We have a research department. We have a great graphic design department. So we have all the elements needed to get a podcast and make it. What you really need with podcasts is an edge. You basically need a reason why your story should be told in your hands and not somebody else's. So the case of Fat Leonard, it had been in the newspapers quite a lot, but we were able to smuggle him a microphone and get over 20 hours of audio recordings with him when he was in home arrest. So the fact that we got that recording was our edge. We did a show last year called Crypto Kingpins about Sam Bankman-Fried, the crypto fraudster from FTX. The way we did that was I'd gotten to know Changpeng Zhao, the Chinese crypto billionaire who was Sam Bankman-Fried's mentor, and then Sam turns on him, and it was CZ that brought Sam down in the end. So we were able to do the show because we had multiple interviews with CZ. So you need to have your edge. And if you have an edge, then that makes your project sort of more valuable than others.
Sure, but would it be right then to say that podcasts are your main source of revenue? And what would it typically cost to make one of your podcasts?
We make the podcasts as what we call like the first iteration or the first version of the story. And it can cost anywhere from, tens of thousands of dollars to up to over $100,000, depending on how many episodes you do. But you need to do something with very high quality sound design, very high quality storytelling, because these podcasts are scripted and structured. Even though they're true stories, we spent a lot of time in the structuring of them because we want audiences to feel like that cinematic experience. And that's how you create an audience around a story that then makes it less risky for a Hollywood studio or a streamer like Netflix to buy it, because they then see, there's actually an audience for this thing, and it's in the podcast world. So the podcast business, when you're talking about these kinds of podcasts, these limited series storytelling, the podcasts themselves aren't what makes the money. The business model here is that piece of intellectual property you've created is worth something down the road as it gets developed into a TV show or a film. So that's the reason why we're in podcasts. Our latest show, which is just out right now, is called Fur and Loathing, and it's about this terrorist attack on a furries convention. Furries are these humans who dress in animal costumes, which happened in Chicago a decade ago, and they never found the culprits. And it's the worst terrorist attack on US soil since 9/11. And we got our edge. We reopened the investigation ourselves. We found the perpetrators, which we'll reveal in later episodes. So that's obviously a great show for a documentary and for a TV series. So that's kind of the business that we're doing over and over again.
Tom, I have to ask you then, what you think it is about true crime that makes it such a popular genre?
Well, I think there's the twisty turniness of true crime, right? Who did it and why? I think that's why people, if you think about it, that draws you through the episodes, whether it's on TV, it's procedural. That's why procedural TV shows, cop shows are so popular. Medical shows as well, where, someone's got to be saved. There's a sort of end point to it all. So on Fur and Loathing, our furries show, people are hooked now because we're on episode 2 launched this week, and everybody wants to find out who did this attack. on the furries convention that, left 19 people in hospital. It was a chlorine gas attack, by the way, which was the gas used in the First World War. And everyone laughed off the attack because it was against humans dressed in animal costumes, right? So the FBI and the US media all laughed it off. But we found the perpetrator through our own investigations, teaming up with a furry blogger called Pat Chauffeur. And so that's the true crime catnip, right? People want to find out who did something.
Coming to Project Brazen, I noticed that all of your podcasts are free, and I know that you do have a subscription, but where exactly does a studio like yours make their money from then?
Yeah, so you can make money from podcasts, from advertising, and you can make money from having a subscription model around your shows, which we have both of those, and they do make money. But yes, the real economic goal here is to create a piece of work that is the basis of a franchise of other shows that get made on the back of it. So 3 years ago, when we set up this company, we were journalists who were selling individual pieces of work. We sold Billion Dollar Whale. Bradley sold his other book, Blood and Oil, which is about Mohammed bin Salman. We sort of figured out that, if we're going to do this as individuals, it would be better to become the producers ourselves and to raise financing and then to develop all these great ideas that we have and all the ideas of other people who we now finance and push them through into the system. And I spend a lot of my time actively producing those shows as well. So that's finding script writers, finding production partners, talking to studios, talking to streamers, and selling it to the end buyers. So we've had about 15 podcasts since we launched. And, we've set up, a bunch of them, more than a third of them are already set up and are in production as documentaries, TV shows, and films. So that's really how we make our money.
What about legal issues? How difficult has that been for you to navigate now?
Yeah, the big difference is if you're at the Wall Street Journal, you have the in-house counsel to support you and you're indemnified from all of this. Whereas now I'm a co-owner of a company, we have to make sure we don't get sued. And the way to do that is to write stuff that's true. So, until now, we have not had a defamation problem, but we did have an issue with a judge in the Fat Leonard case who subpoenaed our tapes. So what happened there was because we smuggled a microphone to Leonard while he was in house arrest, and there were a bunch of other Navy officers on trial, and Leonard had pleaded guilty. So he was the state's witness. He was going to be called as the key government witness in those Navy officers' trials, and they pleaded not guilty. When the podcast came out before their trial, the defense lawyers subpoenaed the court wanting our tapes because they thought maybe in the raw tapes, there'd be some evidence of something that would help their clients. And we fought that because we made the argument that, I'm sure you as a journalist, Dia, you wouldn't want someone rifling through your notebooks, right? And under the US, that's the First Amendment protections. Like my raw notes are my raw tapes when I'm making a podcast. So we fought it, but unfortunately we lost because the judge ruled that the Navy officers' right to a free trial was more important. So we had to turn over all the tapes. So what we did was we basically made them publicly available rather than just giving them to the defense lawyers. We just put them up online. So if anyone wants to go listen to them, they can.
What are the stats like, Tom? How large is the true crime market?
Rather than statistics, I'd say that it was through our experience of selling multiple projects, the demand for it was very high. And as if you look at what gets made, whether it's Big Little Lies, which is based on a fiction, or The Staircase, which is based on a true story, those are the kinds of shows that get made on a regular basis. And so we had so many ideas for stories. We just wanted to start a company.
When a show is sold to a streamer, how much could it cost them?
Different shows have different levels, right? So maybe a less ambitious show, maybe a few $100,000, like something that's really, I know that Nuclear War, for example, by Annie Jacobson, which is the book she's just written about what would happen if North Korea struck. That book's just sold for $1.5 million. So, shows that are in demand, books that are in demand, podcasts that are in demand, those are the kinds of numbers that they do. And then, smaller projects that aren't as, there aren't as many parties bidding for it will do, in the lower hundreds of thousands. So the trick is you've got to be able to create a conveyor belt of these stories that are all very in demand. So that's what we're doing at the company.
We've spoken about the opportunity quite extensively, but I wanted you to weigh in on the challenges. What are they?
The challenge might have been, I think a few years ago when we started the company, the economics of the podcasts themselves were better. So, your chances of, at least covering your costs or making money on advertising and podcasts were better than they were today, to be frank. So the podcast world is shaking out and we need to figure out the economic model.
Lastly, Tom, do we get to see an India true crime story on Project Brazen soon?
So that's a great question. We have been thinking about India's stories and we haven't quite hit upon the right one yet. So you know what? If anybody listening to this has a great India true crime story that they think we should be doing, they should write into you or write into us. You can find us at projectbrazen.com and you can drop us a line. I mean, I think India is full of great stories. We just haven't done one based in India yet.
Every time I watch or listen to a true crime podcast, I feel myself trying to be Sherlock Holmes, or if I were to make it more desi, Chachi Chaudhary. I need to deduce who did it, how they did it, why they did it, and what happened to the people affected by it all. Crime tells us more about who we are as a people than anything else. It's a reflection of all that's wrong. A stark reminder of the grim realities behind our airbrushed lives. It's grisly, it's dark, and it's uncomfortable. It lurks in the shadows, creeps up on you in dark alleys, or sometimes is brazen enough to be cruising around in broad daylight. Crime tells us the story of power and politics, gender and caste, religion and corruption, base human tendencies, and the worst we are capable of, like no other. I sometimes question my own fascination with true crime because it is a crime after all. But then I go back to what Sherlock Holmes famously said. Crime is common, logic is rare, and therefore it is upon logic rather than upon the crime that you should dwell. But I've realized that it's most likely just the power of great storytelling and a general affinity to understand what one would term bizarre. These stories not only entertain, if that's even the right word to use, but also inform and provide listeners with a cautionary tale to learn from sometimes. It's clearly a genre that's here to stay, and that's because it just makes a lot of business sense to give the market what it wants. So while your Savdhan India and Crime Patrol type shows will continue to be popular, alternate channels like YouTube's true crime content creators and streaming platforms are going to go hammer and tongs to make the most of this new wave of non-fiction storytelling. Thank you, Aryan, Aishwarya, Christo, and Tom. That's all for today. This episode was produced by Surohini Jain, sound editor Rajas Nayak, executive producers Anirban Chaudhary and Arijit Burman. The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Tune in to ET Play for all audio content. You can also listen to our podcast on all major podcast streaming platforms. Thank you for listening and have a great weekend. All external sound clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.